Hello again everyone, it's your old friend Theta, aka the Monotone Messiah. I've made a couple of videos already about joining the league, but a recurring request is for a video about how to prepare for league play, or to just generally make the transition from casual to competitive play. This is a pretty big question, and I won't be able to address all of it in one go. But my goal now is to make more videos specifically targeted towards competition and how to become a viable competitive player. Also, much like my videos on the mental game and the 1.8 update, I'm making this in the hopes that it's useful beyond the narrow scope of Onward. I've been studying and participating in competition across a variety of sports and games for a long time, and from my perspective, Onward is merely a medium to communicate these ideas. If this is your first time watching one of my videos, I'm currently a competitor on Mayhem, which is, as of today at least, the number 4 Onward team in the world. So even though I would never call myself the absolute best player in the league, hell, I don't think I'm even the best player on my team, I do think I know something about what it takes to compete in esports at a high level. Anyway, competition is close to a universal concept, and that's how I'm approaching this video and the rest of the videos I plan to make on the nature of competition. It's a somewhat long video, but if you're serious about competing, whether that's an Onward or any other esport, then it's worth watching the whole thing. Before starting, I just want to say I've listened to your requests, and I do have merch incoming. Right now I'm waiting on the test merchandise to come in, and once that passes the quality test, I will make that available to you at ThetaVR.net. Also, I would like to point out that my videos are now featured on the VRML website, which you can go to at vrml.com, or alternatively vrmasterleague.com/onward. I will put a link in the description. With all that out of the way, let's get into the video. At a fundamental level, becoming a competitor is all about change. Competition is an arms race, both in literal and figurative terms. Everyone who competes is competing both with other competitors and previous versions of themselves. It's a challenging, often lonely road to take, but whoever makes the decision to struggle for the top will be transformed. In order to understand what kind of transformations can and must occur in order for you to be successful, you need to start by identifying the two different types of change available to you: quantitative and qualitative. Quantitative changes are basically just changes in volume or intensity. If you're lifting weights, for example, a quantitative change would mean changing the reps per set or increasing or decreasing the weight on the bar. These types of changes tend to be easy to implement, since all you're doing is more or less of the same thing, and as a result, they are quite popular. Qualitative changes, on the other hand, are distinct changes in behavior. To use weightlifting again, this would mean you change what kind of lifts you perform each time you're in the gym, or you alter an existing lift by changing where you place your hands, set your feet, and so on. So rather than just increasing or decreasing the frequency or intensity of a specific activity, you're engaging in a different activity altogether. As I mentioned a moment ago, there's a popular emphasis on quantitative changes whenever people are trying to improve and move up in some competitive hierarchy. A lot of this is because this guy, Malcolm Gladwell, famously posited that all it takes to become a world-class anything is 10,000 hours of practice. But the truth about expertise is more complicated than just racking up hours. The guy who did the research that Malcolm Gladwell based his framework on, this guy, Anders Ericsson, has clarified that he never created a hard and fast 10,000 hour rule. Instead, what he said was there is a baseline in every domain for the quantity of hours spent practicing in a particular way, which he labeled deliberate practice. In many cases, that baseline is far below 10,000 hours. But the key here is to focus on the concept of deliberate practice itself. If you're practicing deliberately, you're focusing on your weak points and actively working to alter your behavior. This is not the same as just showing up and hoping that time itself will make you an expert. In short, deliberate practice is about generating qualitative changes, and just showing up more often is a type of quantitative change. To be more specific, deliberate practice is about addressing leaks. Your leaks are flaws in your behavior, or actions that can hurt you instead of help you in competitive scenarios. So when you're practicing deliberately, you're focusing on your weak spots and working to fix them. This is all you need to worry about if you're practicing the violin, but in zero-sum competitive games, there's also another element you need to consider as well: your opponents. Deliberate practice in this type of environment means not only focusing on your own leaks, but identifying and exploiting the leaks in your opponent's game as well. Do this enough and you'll come up with winning strategies. Again, this is about qualitative change. When you address a leak, you aren't, in most cases at least, just doing the same things more or less often. You're fundamentally changing what you're doing, not the frequency of what you're doing. You'll find that each level of competitive game relies on specific types of qualitative changes in competitors. At the lowest levels, you can make some substantial mistakes and still win. Your leaks will remain in place because nobody at that level is good enough to exploit them. As you move up, your leaks become more and more of a liability. Those who survive at the highest levels of any competitive game are those who have insane levels of awareness of both their own leaks and those of their opponents. They use this awareness to figure out strategies that will put them in a position to win. This is what competitors mean when they say there are levels to this. At the very tippy top of the ladder, minor mistakes will cost you dearly. Even if you're really good, if you haven't made the correct level of qualitative changes, you're liable to get blown out. The idea of all this is pretty simple. If you want to become competition grade, you need to start making fundamental changes to your behavior. Don't expect hours played to magically translate into good results, because if that's what you're leaning on, you will be disappointed. In my opinion, the most important qualitative change you need to make is how you view the game you want to compete in. It's a distinction that I like to refer to as playing for fun versus playing for blood. When you play for fun, there isn't really a goal to speak of. Your only objective, if you can call it that, is to enjoy yourself. Every person defines that in a different way, and for most people this means that losing a lot isn't a big deal. If you're only interested in having a laugh, you're not likely to pay attention to the scoreboard. To be clear, there's nothing wrong with this. Every one of us has a large number of activities that we pursue only for fun, and that is healthy. But if you want to compete and succeed within a specific game, then you can't think this way when you play it. This is because competition, unlike casual play, does have a single, well-defined goal: winning. That means everyone involved is optimizing their behavior towards victory. This stands in stark contrast to people playing for fun, who have an endless list of possible motivations for their play. However, playing for blood can be upsetting to some people. For example, it's common in Onward for casual players to get pissed off at competitive players who play with patience or sit in one spot. I can't tell you how many times I've heard someone flip out on a player for quote-unquote camping, which turns into accusations of cowardice. This isn't a problem with how anyone is playing a game per se, it's a mismatch of intentions. One player is playing to win, and the other is playing for fun. When these two intentions collide, it's bound to cause problems. It's sort of like if you go play a friendly game of pickup rugby and one guy just starts spear tackling people into the dirt. The problem isn't that he's playing the game wrong necessarily, it's that he's playing it in the wrong environment. He should go play with other people who care about that level of intensity. As a competitor, you need to realize that playing for blood isn't for everyone. While I personally find competition to be thrilling and enjoyable, many people don't feel that way, and I'm willing to respect that difference. I will say that nobody's perfect, and while I'm guilty of getting pissed off at casual players on more than a few occasions myself, I still think it's not right to hold people to that standard. Don't be a dick to people who don't play to win. It's not a crime to play for fun, even if you find it annoying or stupid. You just need to go find an environment that suits your competitive aspirations. This leads me to my next point. Playing with those who don't play to win hurts you more than it helps you. If you're playing a team game and even one or two of people on your team isn't playing to win, it's very hard to practice in a constructive way. Even if you do everything correctly, they'll make mistakes that can cause you to lose because they don't care about winning. Because they don't care about winning, they won't optimize their actions towards that goal. The same can be said when you're playing against a team that contains one or many casual players. The real danger here is that you can draw the wrong conclusions about the results you're seeing. If you crush a team of casual players, it doesn't mean anything because they aren't bringing their best game. Likewise, it means very little if you get destroyed when everyone else on your team is dicking around. In a team game, everyone needs to be focused on the same goals for you to get any kind of usable information about your performance. This is the disconnect that causes real shock for people who first step into the competitive arena. You might think you're a high-level player because you dominate casual players, but exposing yourself to even low-level competition will put your ego in check. Many people quit after this experience, but that's a shame because it's often the most useful feedback you can get. When you step into the world of competition, you get raw, unfiltered information about how good you really are. I've seen a lot of people in the League Team Finder channel say things like, "I do really well in lobbies," or "I've only played for a few hours, but I'm pretty good." And I can't help but chuckle a bit. Yes, it might be a good sign you come out on top in pub lobbies, but more often than not, it's a mirage. You aren't playing against competitors in a competitive setting, so you aren't getting a real sense of where you stand. Some competitors get off on crushing brand new people, believing incorrectly that it's a sign of their superiority. The truth is, the players who do this on a regular basis tend to be mid-tier at best, and they're only hurting themselves by stroking their ego in this way. Crushing new people doesn't make you good, it makes you a bully. The absolute best players are always trying to challenge themselves and improve their competitive awareness. They'll purposefully play against tough opponents and do things like join the weaker team to see what they can pull off even with bad teammates. That's the mindset you need to adopt if you want to compete successfully. As I've discussed before in my video on Tilt, competing itself is a skill you can't refine without competing. You need to learn how to play for blood, and you do that by exposing yourself to those conditions as much as you can. If there's any real quantitative change that's required, it's this. The more competitive experiences you get, the better. Even more importantly, you should not expose yourself very much to non-competitive play if you're looking to be a winning player. There's nothing wrong with bopping around with casual players occasionally or experimenting to figure out some new path, but you don't want to play casually too often. This can create leaks that you won't be aware of until you're in the middle of a match and it's too late. By playing for blood on a regular basis, you'll start the difficult but important journey of discovering what works and what doesn't in a game. Competition tends to uncover the optimal strategies for a given game because everyone is putting their time and energy into figuring out how to win. By the way, in a team game like Onward, it matters that everybody on your team feels this way too and can coordinate with this goal in mind. Anyway, when you see competitors doing something on a regular basis, chances are good it's the best known way to do it. That's the beauty of competition. As everyone explores their own weaknesses and exploits the weaknesses of others, a metagame evolves and emerges. This is the true value of competition. It acts as a stress test for strategies and the leak finding/fixing abilities of players. When the object is victory, strategies which lead you down that path will emerge. It makes everyone who participates better at what could be considered the optimal pathways of play. Participating in the competitive scene will give you exposure to this constant cycle of change. Beware, once you start to play like a competitor, it's very hard to stop. There's a reason high-level athletes tend to retire once they can't compete at a world-class tier anymore. The game just isn't as enjoyable for them. This is why so many competitors get grumpy about casual players playing casually. They're addicted to playing to win, and they want to play with others who feel the same way. Playing in a way that invokes losing is hateful to them, almost like they have an allergy to bad play. As a concrete first step, you need to enter the competitive scene in one way or another. For Onward, that means joining the league, which I've already made a couple of videos about, and if possible, joining a team. If you're playing another game, it's worth exploring whatever the competitive scene is for that particular game and doing the equivalent of joining the league. Either way, once you're in the league, you can start to participate in what we call scrims, short for scrimmage. Scrims are practice sessions between two teams in which both teams operate under competitive conditions. The benefit of scrims is that you can get competitive reps without any sort of repercussions. You could say the purpose of scrimming is to make mistakes when it doesn't matter, so you won't make those mistakes when it does matter. For this reason, you shouldn't focus on wins or losses in scrims. You should be using that time to identify your own leaks and leaks in the other team. After each round, discuss what went wrong, what went right, and what changes need to be made. This guy is John Danaher. He's a famous jiu-jitsu coach, and he has a saying, training is for learning, competition is for winning. His world champion athletes are known to let people put them in bad positions in training, which often results in them tapping. It seems odd because you might see a world champion tapping to somebody who is ostensibly much less skilled, much less credentialed, and so on, but they do this for a very good reason, so they can figure out their own leaks when nobody's watching and there aren't any consequences. This is the same kind of mindset that you should adopt when you're in a scrim or a practice. Lose in practice so you don't lose in a match. Some competitors are fans of repetitive practice routines that involve doing the same things over and over again. This is done in the name of building muscle memory, which is assumed to be the key determinant in competitive settings. While I do think there's some value in drilling like this, it's limited. Most complex competitive games with a large execution element, like Onward, depend much more on the ability to think on your feet. By practicing via drills, you're removing the cognitive element and relying exclusively on situations that you assume will come up in those exact conditions. It also ignores the fact that you're playing a team game. Much of what determines who wins and who loses in a game like Onward is how well teams coordinate with one another. And if you aren't doing that on a regular basis, if you're not practicing that under live conditions, your communication and teamwork will not improve, and your results won't either. The truth is that the best players and the best teams pretty much always value live practices of some kind over drilling. Drilling is only useful for absolute beginners who don't know any of the basics, and even then there's more utility in learning how to use techniques in a live context. In my opinion, people like drilling because it's predictable, and in many cases can make you feel pretty cool. Unfortunately, this predictability can hurt you by lulling you into complacency and building up a false sense of confidence. No matter how you structure your practice time, make sure scrimming is a big part of it. If you don't have a team yet, ping people on the Discord and get something informal organized. But make sure you're including some veterans in there as well, as they can help you get a better sense of what mistakes are being made. It's a truism in jiu-jitsu that it's very dangerous to let a couple of white belts train in isolation, and it's because they will often give each other bad advice and execute bad techniques on each other and just sort of reinforce bad habits. In other words, reinforce leaks. So it's always a good idea to mix it up, have colored belts rolling with white belts. This is the same sort of attitude you should adopt early on. Don't assume that other rookies are going to be the people who can give you the best inputs, because they are not. Anyway, aside from scrims, you should be holding team practices as well, as this will give you the opportunity to run a free roam on a map, discuss specific tactics, etc. without any outside pressure. Sometimes the best strats do come from just taking a stroll with your teammates and experimenting with different positions, weapons, whatever, without having anyone shoot at you. Of course, you'll have to pressure test those strats later, but it helps to take some educated guesses when you aren't under the strains of competition. Once you've got some scrims and practices under your belt, you will need to compete. This is, again, the only true way to get better at competing. So jump in and get some stripes. Don't worry about losing. That's going to happen regardless of your level. In fact, there's an old saying in chess that's relevant here. Lose your first 50 games as fast as you can. The idea is that you want to accumulate competitive experience as quickly as possible, which in turn will allow you to learn what to do and what not to do in those settings. It's the experience that counts more than the wins or the losses. At both an individual and team level, the first thing you should focus on in order to become competitive is defense. There's a famous jiu-jitsu instructional book called Jiu-Jitsu University that opens with a classic sentence. The theme of the white belt is survival, nothing more and nothing less. And if you're not familiar with martial arts, white belt is just the belt you're given when you first start. It's not earned. It means that you don't know anything. The point of the quote carries over to just about every competitive game. When you're first starting out, your first priority should be just surviving, period. In jiu-jitsu, that means not getting tapped, and in Onward and many other esports, it means not getting killed. Everyone wants to rush into flashy, aggressive offense, but that's a terrible starting point. If you're new, you'll fail at those offensive moves, and then you'll need to defend yourself. If your defense is weak, that means you'll get eaten alive as soon as your attacks fail. That's what strong defense does for you. It gives you a secure base for your offense. If you know you have an impenetrable defense, then you'll have the confidence needed to play an aggressive offense. I once heard an MMA coach say, "The worst opponent to face is both aggressive and technical." This is, again, true beyond just fighting. Offense is always more challenging because you need to take the initiative. You need to push the pace, and you need to force your opponent to react to you. It's riskier by default because you can't just wait for the other person to do something, and that means you need to take actions that will expose your vulnerabilities. This is particularly true in a game like Onward, where there's a timer ticking down that the offense needs to work within. If time runs out, the defense wins automatically. That being said, competence on offense tends to come later. The first thing you need to focus on is making sure your defense is rock solid. Once you're confident in your defense, you can start experimenting with and improving upon your offense. Another element of playing for blood is finding a specialty that allows you to capitalize on skill asymmetries. What I mean is that generalists have so-called skill points spread along multiple classes, which is a nice way of saying they're mediocre at many classes. If you specialize, you can dominate more generalized opponents by virtue of your time in class. For example, there are some absolutely insane snipers in this game. Deflate and Mike Crook come to mind, and they're very hard to deal with because they spent so much time as snipers that other players just can't engage them effectively at a distance. You can look at other types of games and see a similar dynamic. One example is fighting games where high-level players play with a very small number of fighters, or even just one fighter within their chosen game. This allows them to focus exclusively on the strengths and weaknesses of their preferred fighter and dominate those without a high level of specialization. Likewise, people ask me all the time about running an LMG every round. The fact is that the LMGs are hard weapons to use for most players. They aren't very accurate, the recoil is pretty rough, and in general they're hard to handle for less experienced players. But they're very powerful in the right hands. They deliver a lot of damage, and their big box magazines mean LMG users can spray bullets for extended periods of time, which in turn means they can vaporize anybody who steps onto their lines and suppress opponents in cover. By spending so much time learning how to use such a difficult but effective weapon, an LMG specialist can identify the situations where the pros and cons of the class will be highlighted. The same could be said for any class, not just LMGs. More generalist players will not be able to fight back effectively if a specialist puts them into a situation where their specialization is strongest. This is a point I've made in my loadout video, but I'll emphasize it again here. If you want to be a competitor, pick a class, pick a loadout for each side, and stick with those. Play with it, figure out the nuances, and put the time in to make sure you can perform effectively with it. Every competitive game has some small set of concepts that, although simple on the surface, are so hard to master that you'll spend the bulk of your time trying to master them. One guy I know who has wrestled for over 20 years, including a stint in Division 1, told me that wrestling, which is notoriously called the hardest sport on earth, can be boiled down to breaking down posture and cutting angles. That's obviously not the entire game, but it's incredible how much of it can be stripped down to these two activities, just being performed in a variety of different ways. A big first step in mastering any competitive game is figuring out a simple framework along those lines. In my personal opinion, Onward is, more than anything, a game built on three concepts: movement, angles, and communication. When it comes to movement, you need to understand how to position yourself so that you aren't easy to kill. That means you shouldn't do things like crawl in large open spaces, hit wide corner peaks, or travel in bunches. A good couple of rules of thumb are to move quickly if you're going to move, and only crawl when you're in some kind of cover. The mark of a new player is usually an insanely conservative movement speed, mixed with their rifle up, and often bunched with too many of their teammates. Co-op players are unfortunately the absolute worst about this, because the co-op mode involves shooting unthinking AI. It's fine to move slowly and in groups when you aren't dealing with real thinking humans. This is a sort of high-tech version of playing against casual players, where it becomes easy to think you're good just because you're beating the hell out of incompetent bots. The next concept is lines. Onward is a game of angles. Whoever controls the angle controls his opponent. This is because Onward is a game with very low time to kill, aka TTK, which means you can die with as little as one bullet. Because you can die so easily, the game revolves more around what could be called the ambush dynamic. The most effective strategies involve misdirection, surprise, and flanking. The ultimate power move in Onward is the knife from behind, because it means that not only has the knifed player's angle been negated, but the knifing player has pulled off a complete flank. These situations are rare, however. So if you want to stay alive in most situations, you need to understand two things. Number one, where there's a line on your position, and number two, where there's a line on your opponent's. On defense, for example, the most powerful positions are those that watch places where the offense must take aggressive action out in the open, such as crossing a street. The absolute ideal is to have a position where they won't be able to see you until they're out in the open and you're in cover. They might still tag you by luck or reaction time, but the probabilities will be in your favor. Likewise, when you're on offense, you need to consider where a defender might be positioned to do this very thing to you. Don't recklessly cross a street or other open space unless you know it's safe or you have some form of cover, like smokes or suppression, to protect you. These are both subjects that could fill their own long videos, so I won't go any further for now. Just start thinking about how you're moving and where lines are in a given map as you play. Having this awareness alone is a huge step over most casual players. Another incredibly important skill in any team game is communication. All of what I've discussed above is out the window if you don't know how to talk to your teammates and develop an information-rich environment. I already have a video on communication best practices in Onward, so I won't dive into specifics for that game here. What I will say is that it's important to practice good communication no matter what lobby you're in. Even on the rare occasion I go into a pub lobby playing a garbage game mode like Assault, I still communicate as if I were playing with competitors. Not because I think they'll reciprocate and use what I give them, they won't, but because I want to maintain my own good habits as much as possible. Finally, make sure you're recording your scrims, practices, and matches, and make a point of reviewing that footage. After every match, Mayhem gets together and watches a playback of the game. We walk through every mistake as well as every good play, and we've all learned a ton by making a habit out of this. I also sit and watch my own individual footage to see what I could have done better. This is particularly important when a match either isn't casted or the casters missed an important moment. And I do want to qualify that by saying casting is really hard to do well, and it's very easy to miss big plays on a giant map. No matter what game you're playing, this should be a habit. Watch footage of yourself and watch footage of other players. Watch matches, even if you don't have a dog in the fight, just so you can pick up useful bits of information. That's all I've got for now. That was a long one, so thank you for sticking around. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to share it with your friends on social media. I hope that this video in particular can reach not just Onward players, but anybody who is interested in competition as a concept. Also, make sure you check out my website, which is ThetaVR.net. By the time you watch this, it may very well have merch on it. If not, sign up for the mailing list so you can be notified when it is available. And of course, subscribe if you enjoy what I'm creating, and join my Discord. Links for everything in the description. Anyway, it's been fun. This is Theta, signing off.
Yeah, Nick. I walked around the corner on him. She's like, no.